several properties that might be available for rent, but Mr. Kelly hasn't been helpful about setting up the appointments, Angelica explained. And it was irritating that the property owners insisted that Angelica go through Bob. How long could they afford not to rent to the chamber, and was Bob subsidizing them in the interim out of spite? He couldn't do it forever, but meanwhile Angelica's patience was near the snapping point, which was evident by the tightness in her voice. And it wasn't surprising that Angelica had a hard time holding on to her temper. Betsy constantly complained, despite the fact they'd been over the same ground at least 100 times since Angelica had won the election, beating Bob by a handful of votes to become chamber president on the first of the year. Meanwhile, the chamber's former digs up the street had remained empty and unrented. Spoilsport Bob had declined to even contemplate negotiating a new lease. Luckily, the door opened, interrupting what was sure to be another tense conversation. Unfortunately, it was Franny Mae Armstrong who entered the cookery. Franny had been the chamber's previous receptionist. Bob had fired her, but not only had Angelica hired her to manage the cookery, she'd given her a fat raise and health care benefits too. Betsy resented that fact and made no bones about it. "Good morning, all," Franny called cheerfully. "Isn't it a lovely day?" It was not. The sky was steel gray, but she knew the sound of her Texas twang set Betsy's teeth on edge. She zeroed in on the chamber's only employee. "And how are you today, Betsy dear?"
"Just fine," Betsy grated. "I have work to do. I'd best get to it," she said, pivoted, and flounced toward the back of the store to empty her wastebasket. Angelica waited until Betsy was out of earshot before she spoke. "Really, Franny, must you tease her so?" Franny feigned innocence as she shrugged out of her leather bomber jacket and set it on the sales counter.
"Why, I'm always as sweet to her as my mama's homemade peach pie. I can't help it if Betsy is such a disagreeable person." Angelica frowned. "No, I suppose you can't." The door opened again, and two women dressed for the Arctic entered the store. Customers were so rare these days that both Angelica and Franny practically leapt to attention. "Welcome to the cookery," Angelica said, rather enthusiastically. "Please don't hesitate to ask if you need assistance," Franny called out. The women nodded and stepped farther into the store to browse. Angelica picked up the conversation where she'd left off. "I've got a hard decision in front of me. The chamber can have a full-time receptionist who does little else but take potty breaks and complains, or we can have a part-time employee and rent office space. At this moment, I'm leaning heavily toward that second alternative. All we need is a tiny storefront, and there isn't one available right now." "What about renting a bungalow at the Brookview Inn?" Tricia suggested. Angelica shook her head. "The cost would be prohibitive." The bell over the door jingled again, and Tricia looked up to see Charlie, the 60-something mailman, come through the door. He was bundled in his regulation coat and hat, with a big leather pouch slung over his shoulder. "Mail call," he said cheerfully. He handed the bills and junk mail to Angelica. "Thanks." She set them on the counter and turned her attention back to Tricia and Franny. "If Bob is keeping you from his clients, maybe you should just forget about him. Why not place an ad in the Stoneham Weekly News?" Angelica sighed. "Yes, I suppose I could. I'll call Russ today. Better yet, maybe I should just go over there." They heard a bang from the floor above and instinctively looked up. Had Betsy just slammed a file drawer shut? Tricia looked at Franny, the eyes and ears of Stoneham. "I'm surprised you don't know of any places to rent in the area." Franny crossed her arms over her bright green aloha shirt decorated with parrots and frowned. "Believe me, I'd like to get rid of Betsy just as much as anyone else around here, but most of the available rentals I know about are in Milford."